This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What you are watching is something quieter and much more dangerous. For decades, this system survived not because it was strong, but because it was slow. Delay was the lubricant. Appeals, procedures, norms, courtesy, time. Tonight, something snapped. Not loudly, not emotionally, procedurally. A line that was never supposed to be crossed was crossed anyway. And once that happens, the system doesn't react the way television expects. It doesn't shout. It doesn't panic. It accelerates. Multiple safeguards that were designed to move one at a time are now moving together. And when that happens, power doesn't disappear. It collides. If you are trying to follow this through headlines, you will miss it. Because the danger isn't what just happened. It's what can't be slowed down anymore. Stay with me. Because once the clock changes, nothing goes back. And the next piece explains who's actually holding the clock now. Nothing you are watching right now is being driven by personalities. That's the mistake most people make. They assume power lives in offices, faces, elections. It doesn't. Not anymore. Power lives in timing. For a long time, the system was controlled by whoever could slow things down the most. Delay was leverage. The longer something dragged out, the safer everyone at the top became. But that is no longer what's happening. Control has shifted away from politics and toward process. Quiet people, dry rules, deadlines that do not argue back. When that shift happens, loyalty stops mattering. Narratives stop mattering. Even popularity stops mattering. Because the system isn't asking who you are. It's asking whether the next step is mandatory. And right now, multiple parts of the system are answering that question at the same time. That's why this moment feels unstable. Even before anything big happens. The guardrails aren't gone, they're moving. And the most dangerous changes are always the ones that feel administrative. Which brings us to the shift that made this collision inevitable. There was a time when this system moved in a predictable order. First came the warning, then the investigation, then the delay, then, eventually, nothing. That rhythm trained everyone involved. Institutions learned to wait. Power learned to stall. The public learned to forget. Slow became normal. Normal became safe. And then, quietly, that changed. Not with a vote, not with a speech, not even with a crisis. It changed through repetition. Rules were bent, deadlines were ignored. Consequences were postponed again and again. Each time, the system adapted. It learned to absorb pressure instead of releasing it. But systems that only absorb pressure don't become stable. They become brittle. What looks like calm is often just compression. And when compression replaces release, the danger isn't collapse. It's simultaneity. Things stop happening one after another. They start happening all at once. That's when the past rushes into the present. That's when delay stops protecting anyone. And that's why the next moment didn't arrive as a headline. It arrived as a shock. Then came the moment that forced everyone to stop pretending this was still theoretical. It wasn't loud. It wasn't televised live. It didn't come with a countdown clock. It came as paperwork, a formal action, documented, time-stamped, irreversible. Not a warning this time. Not another admonishment. A step that is almost never taken, because once it is, there is no clean way back. The language was careful, almost sterile, but inside it was something explosive. A declaration that delay itself had become dangerous, that the usual tools were no longer sufficient. That waiting was no longer neutral. That inaction now carried risk. This was not the story people focused on. They argued about reactions. They argued about politics. They argued about consequences. They missed the point. This wasn't escalation as punishment. It was escalation as containment. Because when a system concludes that time is no longer an ally, it stops asking for cooperation and starts triggering the next mechanism automatically. And once that switch flips, The system does not ask permission. It proceeds. Here's the part that almost never gets explained. The system is designed to look human. Debates, hearings, statements, votes. But underneath, it runs on something much colder. Triggers. When one threshold is crossed, it activates another body. That body doesn't debate intent. It verifies condition. If X happens, Y must follow. No outrage required, no consensus needed. The damage doesn't fall where the power sits. It falls where the system can absorb it. Institutions pass risk downward, from leadership to staff, from staff to procedures, from procedures to the public, and the people who benefit most from delay are never the ones who pay when delay collapses. They've already extracted what they needed: time, money, position. When simultaneity begins, the insulation disappears. Every action produces multiple consequences at once. Legal, political, social. No single actor controls the blast radius anymore. That's why this moment feels different. Not because someone broke a rule, but because the system has stopped absorbing violations and started redistributing them. And once redistribution begins, it doesn't target intent. It targets exposure, which is exactly why the next shock moved faster. After that, things stopped spacing themselves out. Events overlapped, signals crossed, responses triggered before reactions finished forming, statements were issued while countermeasures were already underway. Plans were adjusted while previous plans were still being defended. This is what acceleration looks like. Shorter timelines, narrower margins, less room to improvise. Every move now carries secondary effects and tertiary ones. What used to take weeks now takes hours. What used to take hours now happens immediately. Silence becomes suspicious. Noise becomes evidence. Attempts to slow things down only activate more processes. Attempts to control the narrative only widen the exposure. At this stage, even restraint becomes a signal. Even hesitation creates risk. Nothing here feels dramatic on its own. That's the trap. Acceleration doesn't announce itself. It compounds. And once compounding starts, you don't feel the impact first. You feel instability, which is why the consequences stop feeling abstract. The moment they touch the people watching, because the system never collapses upward. It collapses outward. This is the point where this stops being distant. Because while institutions collide at the top, the consequences travel downward. They reach schedules, paychecks, safety, certainty. They reach you. You feel it when routines stop feeling reliable, when the rules seem to change without warning, when the tone of authority shifts from confident to urgent. You're told everything is under control, and at the same time, you're asked to prepare. That contradiction is not accidental. It's a signal. Systems under strain don't fail all at once. They shed stress, and stress always lands on the people with the least insulation. If you're paying attention, you can sense it. The tightening, the narrowing of options, the way the future suddenly feels shorter. This isn't about panic. It's about awareness. If you want to understand what's actually happening, you can't afford to look away now, because the next movement doesn't stay personal. It doesn't stay domestic. It spreads. Instability does not respect borders. When a system this visible starts to wobble, everyone notices. Allies stop assuming continuity. Adversaries stop assuming restraint. Markets hesitate. Diplomacy slows. Signals that used to be trusted start getting double-checked. Not because anyone wants chaos. Because predictability just lost its guarantee. This is how internal strain becomes external risk. When procedures collide at home, they distort expectations abroad. Every pause is read as weakness. Every acceleration is read as volatility. Quiet recalculations begin. Not dramatic ones, practical ones. What happens if decisions stall? What happens if authority fragments? What happens if timelines no longer align? No one says these questions out loud at first. They don't need to. They start adjusting anyway. And that's the dangerous part. Because once the outside world starts compensating for your internal instability, you don't get to choose the tempo anymore. The system is no longer moving in isolation. And the next phase isn't about what might happen. It's about how fast it could. From here, the system has three possible directions, not outcomes, trajectories. The first is adjustment. Institutions absorb the shock, processes tighten. Authority reasserts itself carefully, procedurally, nothing dramatic. Just enough correction to keep the structure intact. The second is erosion. Nothing breaks outright, but nothing quite works the same again. Deadlines slip, compliance thins, trust degrades quietly. The system keeps moving, but with more friction, less legitimacy, and fewer people willing to defend it when it's tested. Then there is rupture. That's when simultaneity overwhelms containment. When too many mechanisms activate at once and coordination fails, rupture doesn't look like collapse at first. It looks like confusion, competing authorities, conflicting instructions, unclear lines of responsibility. The danger isn't which path is chosen. It's that the choice is no longer deliberate. Momentum decides, and momentum doesn't care about intentions. Which is why the final phase matters so much. Because once acceleration defines the future, control becomes something you either already have or never get back. Here's the part that never feels finished. Because systems like this don't end with conclusions. They end with conditions. What matters now is not a single vote or a single decision or a single name on a document. What matters is whether gravity still works, whether rules still pull behavior downward, whether consequences still arrive on time, whether institutions still believe they are allowed to act before everything breaks. The most dangerous assumption you can make is that someone else has this handled. That stability is automatic. That delay will reappear, that the clock can be reset. It can't. Once simultaneity begins, every moment matters more than the last. Every silence counts. Every action compounds. Nothing here is resolved. It's only been revealed, and the next phase won't announce itself loudly. It will arrive disguised as procedure, as normalcy, as one more step that feels technical instead of historic. If you want to understand what comes next, you have to keep watching the mechanisms, not the drama. Because the danger isn't that the system fails. It's that it keeps going, changed. Stay with this. There is more coming.